Open any list of generational discussions online, and you'll notice something strange. Baby boomers get entire debates about their values. Millennials get endless articles about their struggles. Gen Z gets constant attention for how they think, work, and feel. And somewhere in between, quietly, one generation rarely gets mentioned at all. Gen X, sandwiched between two much louder generations, often left out of the conversation entirely, sometimes only referenced as a punchline about flannel shirts and MTV. And here's the strange part. Most Gen Xers stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. Before we continue, if this already feels familiar, take a second to subscribe to Labyrinth Psychology. This is where we explore the psychology quietly shaping who we become. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. To understand why Gen X became so comfortable being overlooked, you have to look at the numbers first. Gen X is one of the smaller generations in American history, squeezed between the enormous baby boomer population and the even larger millennial generation that followed. Fewer people simply meant fewer voices, fewer market studies, fewer cultural conversations built specifically around them. But the disappearing act goes deeper than population size. Gen X came of age during a period when discussing emotions, mental health, or personal struggles publicly wasn't common practice. There was no language yet for burnout, no widespread vocabulary for anxiety, no cultural permission to say, "I'm struggling," without it being seen as weakness. So, an entire generation grew into adulthood without ever really being asked how they were doing. And, just as importantly, without expecting anyone to ask. There's a psychological pattern that develops when a person, or a whole group of people, stops being asked how they feel. It's not that the pain disappears, it's that the expectation of being understood quietly disappears instead. Psychologists sometimes describe this as learned self-sufficiency, a shift where a person stops looking outward for validation or support, not because they don't need it, but because experience has taught them it usually isn't coming. Over time, this isn't even a conscious decision anymore. It becomes the default setting. This explains a pattern many Gen Xers recognize in themselves, a discomfort with being the center of attention, an instinct to downplay hardship, a tendency to say, "It's fine, don't worry about it," even when things clearly aren't fine. It's not that they don't want to be understood. It's that, somewhere along the way, they stopped believing that wanting it would change anything, and there's a quieter layer underneath that. When an entire generation grows up without cultural visibility, they often stop measuring their worth by how much attention they receive. This can look like strength from the outside, and often it genuinely is. But it can also mean carrying real weight alone, simply because asking for acknowledgement started to feel pointless a long time ago.
If you're part of this generation, you might recognize this in small, everyday moments. Maybe you rarely post about your struggles online, not because you don't have any, but because you never developed the habit of looking for support that way. Maybe you've noticed younger coworkers openly discuss burnout or anxiety at work, in ways that would have felt unthinkable earlier in your own career. And maybe some part of you feels a strange mix of relief and quiet envy watching them do it. This isn't about resentment toward younger generations for having language you never had. It's simply about recognizing a real gap and understanding that just because you stopped expecting to be understood doesn't mean the need for it ever actually went away.
Being forgotten by the cultural conversation doesn't mean a generation stopped feeling things. It just means they learned to carry those things without an audience. Maybe the goal now isn't to demand the spotlight Gen X never had. Maybe it's simply permission, quiet, overdue permission, to say that going unnoticed for this long was never actually the same thing as being fine.